It didn't start with a press release. It started with a deathly silence just before sirens ripped through the Tel Aviv night air. February 28, 2026. You have exactly 12 minutes. The razor-thin margin between life and ruin as Iranian missiles leave their launch pads. But listen closely. This isn't a spontaneous war triggered by politicians. This is the activation of a source code programmed 2,600 years ago. And you'll be shocked to find out why the mighty United States is nowhere to be found in this final hour. For months, the world held its breath. Diplomatic cables flew between Washington, Jerusalem, and the neutral grounds of Geneva and Oman. Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner worked around the clock, seeking a breakthrough that would pull the region back from the brink. President Trump made it clear. He preferred a peaceful path. He preferred a deal. But in the corridors of power in Tehran, that offer was met with silence. And behind that silence, the enrichment centrifuges were spinning faster than ever. The intelligence briefings grew darker by the hour. This wasn't just a hypothetical threat anymore. It was imminent. It was existential. It was the moment every Israeli leader has feared since 1948. By February 28, 2026, the choice had narrowed to a single, terrifying point. Strike first, or risk a blow from which you can never recover. Preemption over absorption. The operation was codenamed Roaring Lion, and it wasn't a symbolic warning. It was a strategic decapitation. In a single, coordinated wave, Israeli F-35s and F-15 pierced Iranian airspace. Their targets? The very nerve centers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Ballistic missile silos in Isfahan. Hardened launch complexes in Karaj and Kermanshah. The weapons that could reach Tel Aviv in just 12 minutes were targeted before they could ever leave the ground. Reports even indicated strikes aimed directly at the leadership compounds in Tehran. This was the strategic doctrine of the Jewish state made real in a single night. Deterrence through decisive, devastating action. It was a message to the world that when existence is on the line, the rules of engagement change. But Israel did not fly alone. Enter Operation Epic Fury. This was the American response, and its scale was staggering. This wasn't a show of support, it was operationally decisive. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest aircraft carrier ever built, positioned itself off the coast of Haifa. The USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group moved into the Arabian Sea. Over 120 combat aircraft surged across the region in coordinated waves. From 40,000 feet, AWACS platforms directed the most complex air theater the world has seen in over 2 decades. This was the largest American military mobilization in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. President Trump announced the start of major combat operations, not from a podium, but through a direct video message. He framed it as a necessity to destroy the missile and nuclear capabilities that threaten the free world. He spoke directly to the Iranian people, calling this their chance for generations to reclaim their future. But look at the strategy, look at the precision. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from destroyers, bunker buster bombs designed to reach the deepest, most hardened facilities. Electronic warfare suppression that blinded every radar screen from the Zagros Mountains to the Persian Gulf. Yet there was one detail that every prophecy student should mark in their notes. There was no ground invasion, no armored divisions rolling across the border, no American boots on Iranian soil. This was a strategy of total air and missile dominance. Overwhelm from above, degrade the command, eliminate the infrastructure. Why does this matter? Because a regime pushed to the edge, stripped of its nuclear shield and its missile reach, becomes a desperate regime. And a desperate regime looks for allies in the most dangerous places. The world now sits in a state of geopolitical wrath. We are witnessing a world caught in the ultimate dilemma, the submission of a regime or the destruction of a global order. As the smoke rises over Isfahan, and the sirens continue to wail. The stage is being set for a coalition that was described 26 centuries ago. A coalition that is forming even as we speak. But here is where most people, even the most dedicated students of prophecy, get it wrong. As the images of burning missile silos in Isfahan and Karaj flicker across our screens, the immediate instinct is to turn to Ezekiel 38. We see the alliances, we see the tension, and we assume we are watching the final invasion of Israel. But if you look closer at the source code, you'll realize we aren't there yet. What we are witnessing in 2026 is something more specific, more targeted, and far more overlooked. It is a forgotten prelude written by the prophet Jeremiah over 2,600 years ago. While everyone is focused on the Gog and Magog war, they are missing the prophecy of Elam. If you want to understand why Israel and the United States struck these specific targets, you have to look at the geography of the ancient world. Elam was an ancient region located in what is now southwestern Iran. It's the province of Khuzestan. It's the home of the Bushehr nuclear facility. It's the site of Iran's most strategic ballistic missile complexes and its vast oil reserves. This is the mainstay of the Iranian regime's might. In Jeremiah 49, verse 35, the word says, "See, I will break the bow of Elam, the mainstay of their might." Think about that word, the bow. In the ancient world, the bow was the long-range weapon. It was the projectile power. In 2026, the bow of Iran is its ballistic missile arsenal. The launchers, the silos, the technology designed to strike from a distance. When the U.S. Secretary of Defense stood before the cameras yesterday, he said something that should have stopped every believer cold. He didn't say they were going after the missiles. He said, "We are not going after the arrows. We are going after the archers." He was describing, almost word for word, the breaking of the bow of Elam. This is what I call a prerequisite prophecy. It is a cleanup, a cleaning of the stage. Before the massive, multi-nation coalition of Ezekiel 38 can gather in the far north, the primary threat to Israel's immediate security, the nuclear and missile bow of Elam, must be neutralized. Why? Because God says in verse 38, "I will set my throne in Elam and destroy her king and officials." Look at the intelligence reports coming out of Tehran tonight. They aren't just reporting damaged buildings. They are reporting the elimination of senior IRGC commanders. They are reporting direct hits on the leadership compounds. The king and officials are being targeted by name. This isn't a hypothetical future. This is the headlines of 2026 meeting the ink of Jeremiah. But why does this matter for what comes next? It matters because of the aftermath. Jeremiah tells us that the people of Elam will be scattered to the four winds. He describes a nation in total chaos, a nation whose pride has been shattered. And this is the information gap that most amateur prophecy teachers skip over. A wounded Iran is a desperate Iran, a regime that has seen its bow broken and its nuclear dreams turned to ash, is a regime that will no longer act alone. By neutralizing Iran's independent power, the 2026 strikes actually accelerate the formation of the Ezekiel coalition. Iran, stripped of its own strength, will have no choice but to throw itself into the arms of the Prince of the North. The strikes on Elam are the catalyst. They are the spark that turns a regional rivalry into a prophetic alignment. When you see the smoke rising over southwestern Iran, don't just see a military victory, see a prerequisite being fulfilled. See the archers being removed so that a much larger, much more dangerous Gog can take his place at the head of the table. We are not watching the end of the story. We are watching the end of the beginning. And as the bow of Elam breaks, it leaves a power vacuum in the Middle East that only one coalition can fill. But there is a shadow growing even larger than Russia or Iran, a shadow that most Western analysts are completely ignoring. Because while the world watches the fire in the West, A silent giant is waking up in the east, and its role in this source code is something that will change everything you think you know about the final battle. Are you ready to see who is really funding the Northern Prince? The strike on Elam was just the beginning. The fire rising over Iran's missile silos isn't the end of the conflict. It is the catalyst for a global escalation. Because a regime with a broken bow is a regime that will stop at nothing to find a new weapon. And they know exactly who to call. The silence in Tehran right now? It isn't peace. It's the calm before a northern storm. As we watch the geopolitical plates shift, we see the formation of a power structure that most Western analysts are too blind to recognize. But for those who know the source code, the roster is already written. Ezekiel 38:2 says, "Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech in Tubal." Look at the map. Draw a line due north from Jerusalem. You don't hit London, you don't hit Paris, you hit Moscow. The far north isn't a metaphor, it's a geographic coordinate. Russia is no longer just a spectator in the Middle East. It is the guard of the alliance. For years, we've seen the naval exercises. We've seen the shared satellite intelligence. We've seen the vetoes at the UN. Why is Russia so committed to a crippled Iran? Because the source code says God will put hooks into their jaws and pull them forth. Russia isn't entering this crisis because they want a world war. They are entering because they cannot afford to lose their foothold in the south. But Russia isn't coming alone. Look at the other names on the list. Meshech in Tubal, Togarma. These are the ancient identifiers for modern-day Turkey. For decades, Turkey was the bridge to the West, a member of NATO, a secular ally. But look at the rhetoric today. Look at the drift away from the Atlantic and toward the Eurasian bloc. Turkey is the most mentioned nation in this coalition for a reason. They are the geographic bridge that makes a land invasion of Israel possible. And then look to the south, Kush and Put, modern-day Sudan and Libya. Nations caught in perpetual instability, now finding common ground in their hatred of the Freedom Bloc. Israel is being surrounded, north, east, and south. The circle is closing. But wait, there is a shadow in this room that Ezekiel didn't name, but the source code of the later days demands we recognize. Let's stop for a moment. When we look at the alliance forming between Russia and Iran, there is a massive phantom looming from the east. A power that Ezekiel's ancient scroll seems to leave unnamed, but whose presence is undeniable. I'm talking about China. Many people ask, why is the world's second largest military power missing from the Ezekiel 38 roster? Does China have no role in the final battle? The answer is found in the kings of the East. China doesn't need to be a formal member of the Magog coalition to be its vital backbone. Think about it. China is the silent provider. They are the ones buying the sanctioned oil that keeps the Iranian regime alive. They are the ones sharing the dual-use technology that Moscow needs to sustain its war machine. In the language of the source code, China is the economic spine of the Northern Bloc. When Israel strikes Iran in February 2026, China may not fire a single missile, but their calculations in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea will be the very thing that locks the hands of the United States. They create the distraction. They force Washington to choose between its interests in the Pacific and its ally in the Middle East. It is a masterclass in strategic encirclement. The dragon is awake, and its role is to ensure that when the Northern Prince moves, the Western superpower is too distracted to intervene. This is the double move on the global chessboard. So what we have now is a collision of two irreconcilable worlds. On one side, the Freedom Bloc, led by a resurgent America First administration and a defiant Israel. On the other side, the prophetic Northern Bloc, a coalition of desperate regimes fueled by Russian hardware, guided by Chinese strategy, and united by a shared hatred of the status quo. This isn't just a regional skirmish over borders or oil. It is a clash of systems. It is the freedom of man versus the mandate of the far north. And as the nations of Togarma, Persia, Kush, and Put begin to align their satellite data with Russian command centers, the tension is reaching a breaking point. The friction between these two blocks is generating a heat that will soon set the global economy on fire. Because when the northern prince finally decides to move his pieces, he won't be looking for a seat at the diplomatic table. He will be looking for a spoil. He will be looking for a prey. And he knows that as long as the Eastern Phantom holds the West at bay, the path to Jerusalem is open. But there is a cost to this alignment, a human cost that no general wants to talk about, a cost that hits the kitchen tables of every home in America and the bomb shelters of every family in the Gulf. Are you ready to see what happens when the global energy choke point finally snaps? The shockwaves from the strikes on Tehran didn't just stop at the borders of Israel and Iran. They reached every kitchen table, every gas station, and every glowing stock ticker on Earth within minutes. This is the moment the great game becomes real for everyone. The Strait of Hormuz. It is the narrow maritime throat of the global economy. Roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes through this tiny stretch of water every single day. Within hours of the first sirens, Iran signaled that the door is closing. Energy markets are not just surging, they are in total freefall. Oil prices spike overnight. Shipping companies are rerouting vessels thousands of miles around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to delivery schedules for food, medicine, and fuel. Futures contracts are pricing in a world without a stable Middle East. But I want you to look past the glowing red charts of Wall Street. I want you to look past the cold, calculated talk of energy independence and market volatility. Because behind every barrel of oil, there is a nameless pain. In Tel Aviv, a mother pulls her children into the center of a concrete shelter as the Iron Dome interceptors thunder overhead. In Isfahan, a father huddles with his family in a basement, listening to the roar of jets that signify a world they no longer recognize. There is a connection between these two families that no diplomat wants to acknowledge. It is the raw, unadulterated fear of the unknown. Why are millions of you watching this right now? Why are we so obsessed with finding the patterns in the source code? It's because of a deep psychological insight that most people are afraid to say out loud. As human beings, we would rather believe in a catastrophic plan than accept aimless chaos. We find a strange, dark comfort in knowing that this pain was predicted 2,600 years ago. Why? Because if there is a script, there is a purpose. If there is a plan, someone is still in control, even if the plan is devastating. The thought that we are just victims of a random, aimless accident is too much for the human soul to bear. So we look to Ezekiel, we look to Jeremiah, we look for the northern prince and the bow of Elam, because we need to know that the fire falling from the sky has a reason. But on the great board of geopolitics, what is the value of a single life? In the bunkers of Washington and the leadership compounds of Tehran, individuals are just digits. They are strategic consequences. They are collateral damage. The kings of the earth take counsel together, moving their carrier strike groups and their drone swarms like pieces on a felt table. To them, the energy spike is a variable. The blockade is a maneuver. But the source code tells a different story. It tells us that while the nations rage, the cries from the shelters are heard. This economic collapse is the catalyst. A desperate nation is a dangerous nation. A regime that can no longer sell its oil, whose infrastructure is burning, and whose currency is worthless, has nothing left to lose. And a nation with nothing to lose is exactly the kind of nation that joins a coalition to take a spoil and take a prey. The economic ruins of 2026 are the fertile ground for the invasion of Ezekiel 38. Hunger and desperation will drive the nations of the North and the South to look at the restored land of Israel, with its massive gas fields and its world-leading technology, and say, we will take what is theirs to save ourselves. But as the world prepares for this massive realignment, a deafening silence is growing. As the American carrier groups launch their sorties and the tomahawks fly, everyone assumes the superpower will always be there to hold the line. But the source code has a hole in it, a massive, gaping vacuum where the world's greatest military powers should be. If we are moving toward the final battle, why does the Bible stop mentioning the United States? Is the economy we see buckling tonight the beginning of the end for the Babylon of our age? Is the epic fury we are witnessing the final roar of a lion before it is silenced? The answer to that question is the most controversial part of this entire journey, and it's the reason why every American watching this needs to pay very, very close attention to what happens next. Because when the Northern Prince finally moves, he won't be looking at the U.S. Navy, he'll be looking at an empty chair. Are you ready to find out what happens to the world when the guard is gone? Look at the roster again. Magog, the far north, modern-day Russia. Persia, modern-day Iran. Kush and Put, Sudan and Libya. Gomer and Togarmah, Turkey. This is not just a list of names. It is a military order of battle. It is a geographic encirclement that has never existed in history until right now. For 26 centuries, these nations were rivals or strangers. Today, they are coordinated points on a single command screen. But as you stare at this map of the coming invasion, there is a detail, a silence that is absolutely terrifying. Where is the United States? Think about the scale of what we just witnessed. Operation Epic Fury was the largest American military posture in the Middle East in over 2 decades. We saw the USS Gerald R. Ford. We saw the Tomahawks. We saw the dominance of the U.S. Air Force. America is the undeniable guard of Israel in 2026. So why, when the Northern Prince finally gathers his great company to take a spoil, is the world's greatest military power nowhere to be found? This is the superpower gap in the source code. Why does the prophet, so specific about minor regional players like Put and Togarmah, completely ignore the nation that dominates the 21st century? This is the part that most Western analysts refuse to talk about. This is the mystery of the silence of Babylon. Why does the nation with 11 carrier strike groups vanish from the prophetic record in the final hour? Let me widen the lens. There are 3 scenarios for the disappearance of the United States, and each one is more unsettling than the last. Scenario number 1, internal collapse. Look at the division in our streets today. Look at the fracture in our society. Imagine a United States so broken by civil unrest, so crippled by a contested election or a sudden financial meltdown, that its leaders are forced to look inward. When the military is needed to protect our own borders, to keep our own cities from burning, who is left to defend the mountains of Israel? A nation divided against itself cannot stand, and it certainly cannot lead a global coalition. Scenario number 2, the technical ghost. We live in a world of silicon and satellites. Our entire military doctrine, the epic fury we just saw, relies on digital dominance. But what happens if that dominance is neutralized in a single hour? Russian commanders have already called our government Luciferian. They have tested weapons of indignation designed to blind our eyes. A single, high-altitude EMP could turn the digital giant into a pre-industrial ghost. No communications, no GPS, no power grid. In 60 minutes, the superpower is neutralized without a single soldier crossing the Atlantic. Scenario number 3, the Great Betrayal. This is the political scenario. What if America first becomes America only? What if a future administration decides that the price of oil, the risk of nuclear escalation, and the cost of American blood is simply too high to pay for a tiny country in the Middle East? In Ezekiel's vision, there are nations that protest the invasion: Sheba and Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish. They ask the question, "Have you come to take a spoil?" They issue a statement. They condemn the aggression. They write a diplomatic cable, but they don't move a single tank. Could this be the ultimate fate of the United States? To stand on the sidelines, issuing thoughts and prayers, while the Northern Bloc descends. This silence is not a mistake. It is a warning about the fragility of human alliances. When the mystery Babylon of our age retreats, whether through fire, through rot, or through choice, it leaves a vacuum that the Northern Prince is more than happy to fill. It tells us that when the final hour strikes, Israel will not find her salvation in Washington. The guard will be gone. The carriers will be docked. The tomahawks will be silent. And that is where the source code takes a truly bizarre turn. Because the prophecy says that when the invasion starts, Israel isn't just standing alone. They are standing completely unprotected. No walls, no bars, no gates. How does a nation that just launched a preemptive strike like Roaring Lion suddenly become a land of unwalled villages? Why would the most battle-hardened nation on earth lower its guard? The answer lies in a dangerous illusion, a victory that looks like peace, but is actually a trap. And it all starts with the aftermath of what we are watching tonight. Are you ready to see the peace that leads to the end? Ezekiel 38:11 describes a scene that seems absolutely impossible in the Middle East of today. It speaks of a land of unwalled villages. It speaks of a people at rest, living securely, without walls, without bars, and without gates. Look at the headlines of 2026. Look at the concrete blast walls. Look at the Iron Dome batteries. Look at the underground hospitals. Israel is the most fortified nation on earth. How does a fortress become an unwalled village? This is the paradox of security. And the key to this mystery lies in the very strikes we are witnessing tonight. When Operation Roaring Lion successfully dismantles the nuclear facilities in Isfahan, and when epic fury breaks the bow of Elam, what is the immediate psychological result? It is a sense of total victory. It is the peace of the victor. For decades, the nuclear shadow of Iran has been the walls around the Israeli mind. If that threat is removed, if the archers are gone, a dangerous illusion begins to take root. A feeling that the enemy is finally defeated, that the era of huddling in shelters is over. This is the aha moment for students of the source code. The preemptive strikes of 2026 do not prevent the Gog-Magog invasion. They actually create the conditions for it. They create the false sense of security that the Northern Prince needs to see. When Israel feels safe because its immediate enemies are crippled, and when the United States has retreated into its own silence of Babylon, the empty wall, the defenseless state, is finally realized. Israel lowers its guard. The reservists go home. The focus shifts to the massive natural gas wealth of the Leviathan field. The nation becomes safe, secure, and prosperous. And that is exactly when the hooks are placed in the jaws of the North. The Northern Prince doesn't attack a fortress. He attacks a people at rest. He waits until the walls are down, not because they were destroyed, but because they were voluntarily lowered in a fit of overconfidence. But here is where the script takes its final, breathtaking turn. Ezekiel tells us that when this massive, multi-nation coalition finally descends upon the mountains of Israel, they won't find a U.S. carrier group waiting for them. They won't find a NATO alliance. They will find a nation that appears defenseless. And then, the source code says, God himself steps onto the stage. This is not a military outcome. This is a theological revelation. Ezekiel 38:18-22 describes an event that defies every law of modern warfare. A great shaking in the land, mountains thrown down, every wall falling to the ground. God sends confusion into the ranks of the coalition. Brother turns against brother, pestilence, blood, and an overflowing rain of fire and brimstone fall from the heavens. Look at the numbers. Ezekiel 39:2 tells us that only 1/6 of the invading army survives. That is an 83% casualty rate. This is not the work of Israeli F-35s. This is not the work of American Tomahawks. This is a supernatural intervention on a scale the world has not seen since the parting of the Red Sea. Why? Why would the Creator allow the stage to be set this way? Why let the superpower fall silent? Why let Israel be pushed to the brink of unwalled vulnerability? The answer is found in verse 23. Thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and they shall know that I am the Lord. The purpose of the 2026 crisis, the energy collapse, the strikes on Tehran, the silence of Washington, is to strip away every human crutch, to show the nations that the survival of Israel is not a matter of military doctrine or geopolitical alignment. It is a matter of divine decree. We are watching the stage setting happen in real time. The alliances are forming, the bow is breaking, the superpower is fading. The question isn't whether the prophecy is true. The question is, are you ready for the moment when the headlines stop being about what men are doing and start being about what God is doing? Because the source code is clear. The end of this story doesn't happen in a bunker. It happens in the eyes of every nation on earth. Are you watching? Because the time of the Great Awakening is closer than you think. We are no longer just watching the news. We are watching the fulfillment of the source code in real time. The fire over Tehran and the silence in Washington are not accidents. They are ancient ink becoming modern headlines. Do not be consumed by anxiety. Be strengthened by preparation. This is your moment to wake up and see the world for what it truly is. If you know a soul lost in the noise of the media, share this video. Help them find the pattern amidst the chaos. Subscribe and join us as we continue to decode the final hours of the human script. Stay vigilant. The awakening has begun.